This is the When Work Isn't Work podcast. This podcast exists to help people reignite the love of what they do in a post-pandemic world. The pandemic gave us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reflect on what is truly important to us in work and in life. I'm your host, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director of Lotus People, an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency. We hope you enjoy today's chat. And we are officially recording. How fantastic. Luke, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I am joined today, just to set the tone and share some context, I'm joined today by the wonderful Luke Shepherd, who is the recruitment team lead at HubSpot, an American software business. Luke has, in my opinion, fully embraced the new way of working and also leverages his really strong personal brand online to recruit some amazing talent for the HubSpot business. I am super excited to talk to Luke about building an online presence, being a working parent, and also why he's so passionate about remote working. So I hope everyone enjoys the chat. And Luke, thank you again to you for joining us on the When Work Isn't Work podcast. Brilliant. So to kick us off, can you please give us a bit of an intro, an overview, your role, your career, for those of the listeners who don't know you? Give us a bit of an overview of where you're up to with everything.
For sure. Thank you again so much for having me, Sinead. I think we can hit stop now. That's one of the greatest introductions I've ever received.
Pleasure.
So for those that don't know me, my name's Luke. First and foremost, I am a father of a wonderful now 15-month-old daughter. She's the joy of my wife and I's life. Professionally, I work at a vendor called HubSpot in their people operations function, looking after a recruitment team now. I've spent circa 3 years with the business, starting as an individual contributor and now functioning as a team lead, as you suggested, Sinead. To be completely transparent, I started my career as a recruiter. I'm not going to say I fell into recruitment because I know that's a terrible cliche, but I started in not-for-profit recruitment about 12 years ago because I did a business degree, had a phenomenal HECS debt, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew extracurricularly, I really liked helping people. So I started in that space, and over the last decade or so, I've worked across a number of sectors, but all with that goal of helping people. And I think at the core, that's what recruiters do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a fantastic way, if you've had a business degree, it's a fantastic way to leverage that business acumen and those business skills into that desire to want to work with people and to want to help people. And that at the end of the day, it's funny how easily recruiters, like you can, because it does, and I think this can maybe happen in bigger agencies particularly, but because it does turn into your day-to-day, you can be a step removed from the fact that actually it is about helping people, and you're facilitating people finding dream roles and finding introductions to businesses that they never would have had. And you can speak so passionately about the business that you work for, and you're literally opening the door to that for folks. So it's it's a good way of combining those skills. It's funny because with this podcast, before I even ask you the next question, I've had a few recruiters on. Naturally, my network sits within that space. And it's funny because sometimes we end up turning this podcast into a why you should work in recruitment podcast. I'm like, I swear I'm not selling the dream to everyone. But tell us a little bit about how I guess it does play on your strengths and how you did feel like you were in a role where you kind of got into the fact that this is actually playing on things that you're really good at. I
think first and foremost, I love talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
So as a recruiter, I'm paid to do that, to have conversations with folks, to pull the career thread, proverbially speaking, understanding what drives someone, what are they passionate about. And I think that's a baseline. How do folks get into recruitment? How do they figure out their passion? I think it can be as simple as answering the question with that question. What do you like doing? Do you like helping people? Are you driven fiscally? And if you're driven by money, that's completely okay. I'd say go work in sales. Are you driven by other factors? And 9 times out of 10, there's going to be an industry and function that aligns with your passion and also your skill set. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we look too far ahead as to what's on the horizon without realizing what's in front of the mirror. And again, I like to keep things very simple. If that's one thing folks discover today, Sinead, I love helping people. I love talking to people. The stars aligned into recruitment to be able to assist folks on their journey to build a legacy. And that's one of the reasons why I shifted internally to see the joys of internal promotion, to see folks land their first managerial function, to be able to help people even outside of HubSpot. So in an ideal world, everyone will come and work at HubSpot. And yes, I am biased in saying this, we are a great place to work. But there are so many other great businesses out there as well that are just looking and crying out for amazing talent. Lotus is one of them. So finding that place where you can call home to be part of a tribe is also really important.
It makes a huge difference. And I think that's one thing that in the 7 years that I've been running Lotus, it's been such a driver for me is creating a culture whereby people want to come to work and they want to authentically be themselves. And I've worked in cultures, I'm sure you have, I'm sure you've heard of them through candidates where it doesn't create that atmosphere or environment. And I find that to be one of the biggest motivators in leading a business is having a place where people are proud to say, yes, I work here. And we do our, as you would as well, we do our quarterly engagement surveys, and people are always 100% proud to work for Lotus and proud to represent the brand. And it means a lot. And I think in this candidate driven market, which you and I are well aware of at the moment, this is something that candidates are demanding. And so for businesses to come to the table and say, okay, culture is something that we really need to focus on. It can't just be a kind of tick box exercise. It needs to be genuine. And it's something that isn't a nice to have anymore. I think in this post-pandemic world, it is an absolute essential. And I don't think the businesses that are I think the businesses that aren't kind of prioritizing it, they're the ones that will fall behind. And that goes with all the other flexibility and people first initiatives as well. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your kind of pathway into technology. You mentioned nonprofit. The tech space is definitely an area that a lot of candidates I speak to who don't have the sector experience really want to get into. It's very appealing for a number of reasons. How did you end up kind of falling into the tech space? Or was it indeed falling? You probably, it could have been well more considered than that.
Yeah, great question. I've always had a curiosity around technology, even as a child. And I think it's part of the emergence of software as a service in this tech space that it is less around an end result and solving a solution or providing a solution. So it's less transactional. And so again, I look at what I'm curious about. I started my world in tech recruitment at a vendor called Marketo, which one of their plays was marketing automation. For those that aren't versed in that space, I'm sure we've all got those text messages. I still get them from Domino's when I used to order pizzas many moons ago. Less around, every offer that they've got, but they still, with their marketing automation, figured out that I would order, the 2-for-1 special on a Tuesday with a large Pepsi Max on the side. So most Tuesdays, and this isn't a shout out to Domino's, I'm not sponsored. Maybe I should be.
Sponsored by.
I still get that text message. I'm not sure why I haven't unsubscribed, but
nostalgia.
That's where I started. And again, in full transparency, when I started in not-for-profit recruitment, I was helping folks get off Centrelink payments. And what a great proving ground and platform to build things like empathy and resiliency, etc. But what I found, with all due respect to the not-for-profit space, was there's fairly limited scope for growth individually as I build my career, which is part and parcel of that space. So again, I looked at my strengths, my curiosities, came into Marketo and haven't left the tech space since. What I would say to folks that are looking at this space, they're seeing all these software companies popping up, all these startups around Australia and across the world, recruiters that are looking to break into it, look at your skill set and how that might transition. I know we're sort of talking about recruiters right now, but we had a lot of success hiring ex-agency recruiters into our sales function here at HubSpot because we looked less at logos on CVs and more transferable skills. So HubSpot sales moves very quick. It's a monthly revenue business. It's input matching output. And I'm sure you can agree, Sinead, that's a lot of agency recruitment. So for those folks looking to break into tech, don't give up. It is a very competitive market, but look at what you could bring and how the skills you've got could transfer and transition into the business you are applying for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good advice. And that is, as I said, it's a question we do get asked a lot. It's something that people really do. It's an area and a space naturally. I mean, look at everything that happened during the last few years, while many industries, of course, the airlines and travel and hospitality and so many industries have been massively impacted. You see one industry that's just kind of jumping head and shoulders above the rest and absolutely thriving. And so even that in itself, from a security perspective, I can see the appeal, but definitely from the perspective of just the progressive sort of innovative nature of working within those businesses and the pace and the agility that's required to slot in well. It really aligns with a lot of people, and a lot of people do find it exciting. With regards to, I guess, the benefits and the thinking about the tech space and the pull for people to work in that space, one of the main reasons is, I guess, that focus on flexibility and that focus on the real human-centric, culture-first approach that tech businesses take. I know that for you guys, remote working is an option, and it's something that through your posts on LinkedIn, through following you, I know that you are obviously a massive advocate for sort of remote working. And I call it the future of work, but it's not really the future, is it? Because we're kind of in it. So it's just work now. It's the post-pandemic way of working. But maybe talk me through a little bit around your experience with that as it all happened over the last few years. It's a big contributing factor to the conversations we're having with individuals who are rethinking what they want to do, because they know that they have that level of flexibility available to them in their working lives. So how has that experience been for you?
I will, before I share my experience, I'll share a disclaimer in that remote work isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
And when we talk about flexibility, it truly needs to be flexibility.
Yeah.
Flexibility isn't every hire is remote, because that's just as potentially painful as every hire has to be on site in an office. Yeah. So if I rewind to 2019, which seems like forever ago, before anyone had even known what COVID was, I reside on the Central Coast, about an hour and a half commute north of HubSpot's Sydney office. So I jump on a train with my wife, we'd commute together. Every now and then, Sydney transport would be on time, but every other day it wouldn't. And I'd have a 1.5 hour commute each way. I'd be at the train station before the sun would rise most days, and most days outside of daylight savings, I'd get home as the sun was setting, which was the normal that I knew. And as we sort of shifted through lockdowns and emerged out of the other side, this concept of flexibility, being able to work from home, started to become a reality, because what we saw through the pandemic was the old wives' tale Sinead of not being able to be productive working from home, and they're just on their couch in their track pants watching Netflix. They're not actually working, got completely blown out of the water, because that was all we had. And so HubSpot, moving out of it and indefinitely, offers folks one of three options: to be fully in office, to be fully remote, and to be somewhere in the middle. We call that flex. I've chosen fully remote because I wanted to remove that commute. But for every person like me that's opted to be remote, there are folks that love the thought of going into an office. They're really big on that routine. They might not have a home office set up. They might thrive. They might be heavily extroverted and thrive in an office environment. So I've chosen remote because that suits my lifestyle. I live in a beautiful part of the world. Instead of sitting on a train, I can get the pram out and grab a coffee with my daughter on the Terrigal Beach boardwalk. But I'm cognizant that what works for me might not work for everyone. And it's important for businesses to have this conversation. It needs to be a fluid conversation, and it needs to be tailored to the individual where appropriate. The final disclaimer I'll say is that for some roles, remote working might not be an option. I'm not sure how successful an office manager or even a facilities coordinator could be if they were fully working from home.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine there are so many roles, and we're obviously very specifically speaking about office-based roles rather than blue collar or industrial or anything else. But even within that, as you said, I think there's a lot of different role types that wouldn't. Receptionist, for example, you're not going to go very well with your receptionist sitting from home with the phone. With that, it is interesting because I speak with tech companies that are fully remote first, and they're like the one end of the. We had Alex Hatting on the podcast, who's a chief people People Officer of Employment Hero, and they are fully remote first, and she is such an advocate for it, and she speaks very eloquently about how well it works for them. But at the same time, I'm working with organizations who genuinely want individuals in the business to have 5 days in the office. And so we're kind of dealing, especially as from our standpoint as an agency, we're dealing with all ends of the spectrum. When you have that hybrid model where you have individuals like yourself who are obviously remote, you have people who are in the office, you have flex, what kind of issues and challenges do you think that brings up for leaders? Because I know as a leader, for me, that sounds instantly chaotic, but so many businesses are doing it, and I can see the benefit of it. But yeah, what kind of issues and challenges do you think come up from that setup that we can overcome?
Yeah, I think hybrid models offer two things, and it's funny that I think they can both start with an F, Sinead. Not an F word that some recruiters might say when a candidate declines an offer. I will say that.
That one.
Hybrid workforces offer freedom to choose, but they also offer friction. And what I mean by that is that if we look at both ends of the spectrum, in a fully remote environment, it's very easy to build and tailor events, offsites, etc., end of quarter virtual drinks, you name it. The same with a fully in office. You can book catering, etc. When you've got half of your team in office, half your team flex, or maybe a third of your team flex, a third fully remote, therein lies the challenge that it can't be a cookie cutter approach for managers. Mm-hmm. So there is friction there. I don't think there is a perfect answer or a perfect policy. It needs to be an ongoing conversation. I know the last thing some folks would want is a Zoom offsite where they might do a cooking class because they've been on Zoom sales calls all day. So I think there needs to be an onus of responsibility on each individual manager to have an allocated budget, but to work with their team as to how they can continue to build that team bonding that we've spoken about earlier, how we can build culture in a hybrid work environment. And it's something, it doesn't keep me awake at night, but it's something we're constantly talking about here at HubSpot. When we had such a reputation for being an in-office environment, a great place to work, etc., we're working through that, and it will be a fluid, ongoing conversation. So I think that's some of the friction, how you continue to build team, how you can replicate those beautiful conversations that happen in an office where you both might be walking to a meeting room outside of a formal cadence of a meeting, how you can replicate, if we were on the same team in an office environment, us going down to the coffee shop to grab our morning coffee. I'm sure those connections are getting lost, and how we can sew those together is going to make or break a lot of businesses' cultures over the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's something that from our perspective, what we have chosen to do is spend 2 days in the office and 3 days from home. And then there's a third day where some extroverts and some other people will want to come in and out. And we find that works really well because we're either all together or we're all at home. And so you're all sitting at home, and it's just everything is set up well for it. We're all on Zoom or we're all face-to-face. And so training can happen on certain days. And every business that I speak to has a different approach and is doing different things. But as soon as I start thinking about what I know a lot of businesses are doing, what we're talking about here, having that real hybrid approach, it kind of feels like it could be chaotic, and that you could kind of not have a handle on who's where. And perhaps that is just down to technology and having the right systems and having everything. If someone's in training, for example, do you have someone remote and then a few people in the office, and do you just have it set up so that technology works well? I feel like I don't fully have an answer to it. Is there anything in what you guys are doing at the moment within that hybrid model that you feel is working really well as a glue? Is there any sort of approach or strategy that the leaders are taking to make sure that it runs smoothly?
Yeah, I think a couple of very tangible things. Our onboarding is fully remote. Yeah. And our meetings are remote first to make sure that we're including those remote folks that might be interstate. So that's one thing. I think the other challenge is, and where we're having that ongoing conversation, is really looking at your employee survey data. We use a Net Promoter Score internally, looking at the trends, looking at that feedback to truly gauge what it is that folks need and crave and where we can improve as a business. I think in a hybrid environment, that's crucial on a good day, but even more so.
Right.
Because where you can address those teething pains, it could eventually prevent an attrition down the road. And where you ignore them, chances are folks are going to move.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we actually, we implement quarterly feedback surveys, but what we did, which we always kind of take on board, but what we did recently, as we have grown, we've tripled in size and we're still growing in just over a year. So there's a lot of growth going on at Lotus. And as well as the feedback surveys, we actually sent out a survey, which is basically like in every corner of the business, we just asked like a suggestion box survey. So like, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this? And we got so much incredible intel back. And it's a huge amount of, it's a big piece. It's a big project to go and like take all this information and implement ideas, and a lot came back, which was fantastic. But you're right, it needs to be actioned. And I think it then needs to be, have that execution and have that followed through to ensure that as leaders, as business owners, as businesses, we are hearing people. One thing that I found came back from that was really strong, and we're very good on this anyway, and we definitely have been recognized for this within the team, but really strong further support requests on mental health. So, for example, there was requests on additional mental health days and an EAP program, and kind of extra layers of things that we hadn't been already doing on top of what we currently have. And I think it's so important. I know you would kind of know the same thing. The market's been so mad the last few months that it's capacity versus how much we can do in a day versus the demands of the business versus the demands of the market. How are you going about with your own team and with yourself managing that work-life balance and capacity issue that I know every recruiter is having at the moment?
I think now more than ever, the lines between work and life have never been more blurred. And especially if you're working from home. Again, wind back the clock. Most folks would leave their laptop at the office, leave their work phone, whatever it is, and commute home. When they walk through their personal home doors, it's no longer work mode. But now I'm in a home office as we're recording this, but there's times when my work laptop is on the dinner table or on the coffee table in the corner of my eye. So there needs to be communication and conversations from managers to empower folks and set very healthy boundaries. But also I look at next week. So HubSpot has a global week of rest where everyone downs tools for us to recharge and refresh. There's things like that. We partner with Modern Health, which is an amazing app as one of our benefits, which gives folks 9 sessions with psychologists and counselors to avail yourself to. There's obviously EAPs, etc. Outside of all of that framework, which most businesses will have with a HRBP, again, I'll dial it back to the manager-employee conversations. Are we setting healthy expectations? Are we ensuring that as much as possible, folks are able to understand the rhythm and not burn out? And there's no, again, clean answer to this, I don't think, Sinead. I felt like I've said that to most questions, but I know in my role, there's times when I'll have to work longer hours. And the beautiful thing about working at HubSpot is I know in those times, say I work till 8 p.m. tonight, which I won't because I need to get an end of financial year offer out, etc. I know the business will expect me to take half a day tomorrow to ensure that I'm recharging. So that sort of soft framework ensures that I don't burn out. But if I was working till 8 p.m. most nights, number one, my wife wouldn't be too happy, but that would trigger burnout very quickly.
Yeah.
And so clear communication creates clarity, and that can prevent those situations happening.
Yeah, that's so true. And it is about those preventative measures. I was speaking with, we had on the podcast Danielle from a business called Pioneera, and essentially what they are, it's like the Grammarly for mental health, but they track it's a bot that sits in your emails and your Slack and Teams messages, and it essentially picks up when your language has shifted to the point where you might be experiencing overload of stress or burnout, which is fascinating as a concept. And it's obviously leveraging and utilizing technology to sort of spot those kind of early signs. And I think you're right. It is all about it being preventative and needing to catch that stuff early. And I think as long as there's communication and conversations, we know that there's always going to be more to be done in a day. That's just the nature of being knowledge workers, the nature of the fact that we don't kind of clock off at the end of the day and what we were meant to do that day is done. Like that's just it's not realistic. So it's and I love the fact that you're doing a global week of rest. I love that so much. It sounds like such a good idea, and the cogs in my brain are turning already around how can I make this work at Lotus? How are we going to go with a week without our clients having access to us? It's such an awesome idea. I love that. Do people genuinely take it? Like, is it a case of people kind of going, oh, I've got too much to do, I'll use it as a week to catch up? Or do you think is it enforced and culturally kind of known that you are supposed to log off?
It is, I wouldn't say enforced, but there is an expectation.
Yeah.
Do we freeze email accounts? I'm not too sure. You'd have to ask our securities team. I don't think so. But again, I think the world we're in, Sinead, that it's a great thought that you just touch on. I wonder how many folks in that week, say every business did it, enforced it, how many folks would take 2 or 3 days because they still don't know how to recharge personally? They'd still want to check their emails. Again, looking at frameworks, it'd be unrealistic to expect our sales reps, for instance, to have a full month's quota, given that they're losing a week. That would be a global week of stress, not a global week of rest, if you knew that instead of having 4 weeks to sell, you then had 3. So looking at quota relief there is a very practical framework. I think there needs to be a reinforcement from leaders around that being a part of the culture, that we do recharge. And a great way to get folks on board on it is for managers not to be checking their emails and to be very intentional, to set up something as practical as an out of office. If they wanted to write a post on LinkedIn, I'm sure Katie Burke, our Chief People Officer, will, and if she doesn't, Katie, I will Slack you to make sure you do it. She's very vocal on when she recharges. Same with a lot of our leaders. And when it's an individual contributor or as a manager, you see folks above you in a reporting line doing it, it empowers you to do it as well. The opposite is also true.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I see that in businesses a lot. Again, we're very privileged in the insight and the perspective that we get with so many different organizations. We see what their projection and their brand in market is like, but then we also see what's actually happening internally. And often there is a disconnect between that. And as much as businesses would support and be proponents for balance and work-life balance and mental health, once you get in, there is that culture that does tend to come from the top of flogging and long hours and kind of this is what is expected within the business. And you don't really know that until you get in there. So it's kind of, it's so helpful for us to know that, to be able to kind of communicate and share with candidates before they get into those types of organizations. But you're right, it's definitely something that is led from the top. And I think the onus and responsibility is on leaders to make sure that they are behaving in a way that and I'm always mindful of it. If I ever, on the rare occasion I'd work on a weekend, I will time my emails for a Monday, because I would never be seen to be sending emails late at night or on a Sunday, because I would never want to be the trigger for someone to receive an email notification out of hours and then suddenly have work dread or work fear or work thoughts, even if it's positive, have some sort of association with work, because I'm such a believer in needing to have that switch off time. Same with holidays. We switch every email account off. You're not allowed on email. We will monitor your emails. We will make sure we action anything urgent, but our culture is very strongly focused on absolutely no access to emails when you are away on leave, which is obviously very helpful to recharge. The other thing I wanted to touch on with you, Luke, is with regards to your personal brand, your usage of LinkedIn. From my perspective, where we've seen the last couple of years go is everyone went from in-person networking and LinkedIn to purely LinkedIn. And LinkedIn has really, I know I don't know that off the top of my head, but I do know that their stats and their page visits have gone up and drastically increased over the last couple of years of everyone operating online. And so there has been a real need for anyone within the professional space to, or an opportunity, I should say, rather than a need. There's been an opportunity for everyone to leverage that kind of ability to share content online. And it's something that I see you doing really well. Was that a conscious decision for you? Is it something that maybe talk me through a little bit around your kind of decision around posting on LinkedIn and engaging in your brand online?
I think it's a great question. I think it's my only option to network in a lot of ways. And it's a platform. Social media can be amazing, and it can also be a very dangerous weapon depending on whose hands it's in. I think it's an amazing opportunity to reach folks that I wouldn't necessarily reach.
Yeah.
And do I have a branding strategy per se? I get asked that a bunch, in all humility. I don't. I just look at trying to post every other day with something that will be of value. And I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I am privileged to work at a business like HubSpot that has a lot of announcements, a lot of things happening. And I'm a really big believer on folks aligning with people as well as a product or the company they're going to work for. So if you looked at my LinkedIn feed and stripped it all back, chances are a post would be one of three things: a quote either from HubSpot or from a book that I'm reading at the moment, a role that I might be working on, or a peer that I'm amazed by. And again, I'm truly privileged to work with some world-class talent here, or something to do with remote work. And I think when folks hear this, they get excited, but they can also get intimidated, because so often it could be LinkedIn, it could be Facebook, it could be Instagram. We've all been guilty of it, Sinead. We post what we think's the beautiful sunset with our drink of choice, and then we click post with the caption, the hashtag, etc. 5 minutes later, what do? I wonder how many people have liked it. An hour later, oh my goodness, Sinead, the photo of me with that sunset, I've only got 3 likes. I'm going to take it down, start from scratch. We all think that, and it's such a killer of amazing ideas to compare to one another. I've written posts that have gotten tens of thousands of likes. I've written posts that have not even got 10 likes. I'm not fussed on that. If I post something that is valuable to one person, then that's a box ticked. And I think the shift to online branding, the goal of it is that if someone's looking at that, in an ideal world, they think, you know what, that Luke guy seems all right. I might click on his call to action to find out a bit more about HubSpot. If not, then that's okay. That's the beauty of LinkedIn, that we can choose who we want to follow. We can choose who we align with and who we want to connect with. The other thing I'll share on this is, I think, again, the pandemic has made a rather large pivot to folks merging their personal and professional lives, to posting about who they are as people, not just what they do at work. I'm sure you can wind back the clock with myself, Sinead, to the times where you would have seen comments, this belongs on Facebook, this is not professional, get it off LinkedIn.
It's the age-old argument on people saying this isn't Facebook, and it's like, oh, I completely agree with you, though. It's just the unveiling of us as holistic people rather than one section of ourselves.
And I think that is another way to come full circle, a way we tackle mental health, the way we tackle employee engagement, etc. If we're bringing our full selves to work. For myself, it's my daughter, and it's to a point now where she'll join team meetings and folks are more excited to see her than myself. And I completely get it. I was a bit jealous at the start, but I'm so thankful that I'm in a business where if she's not there, they'll ask, how's your daughter doing, Luke? How's Isabel? You know, how'd she go at daycare, etc. To be able to do that. For other folks, we're coming towards the end of Pride Month. For folks to bring their full expression to work is really important. So creating a safe space as a business, not just in person, but also online on a platform like LinkedIn, is really crucial.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's something that we do train on at Lotus. We have a branding strategy around the importance of online branding and online networking. We don't tell our team to go to this industry event or to go to this. I mean, they absolutely can if they feel they want to, but we put a lot of our energy in from a networking perspective into LinkedIn and into building that brand. And I think you're exactly right. I think that there's a few different buckets that of content that can be shared, and personal is definitely one of them. I think, as well as being credible and adding valuable content and sort of being I guess a thought leader within your space and within your sector. Sharing personal content on LinkedIn, obviously with some restrictions and limits in mind. You don't want to go oversharing too much, but sharing the other aspects of your life and your personality and And that side of things, I think it really does help people build a picture of you and make you more human and more relatable. And that, again, is good for business, and it builds authentic relationships. Have you found with your personal branding, your activity on LinkedIn, I know you have had a few posts that have gone viral. Have you found that it has been helpful? Like, do you see the ROI in terms of candidate generation or brand awareness?
It's a great question. And I will preface by saying I'm not a trade qualified marketer. So yeah. I don't really engage in A/B testing. I'm not looking at funnel metrics, etc. Have folks joined HubSpot because of the content? I'm sure. Yeah. I don't necessarily get too involved in that.
Yeah.
I see LinkedIn content as another tool to my belt, the same way a LinkedIn recruiter license, a CRM, my own personal outreach, etc. It takes me 5 to 10 minutes a day. And I think it provides an insight into the potential of joining HubSpot. I think one of the best messages I've got, and I'd like to say I recalled it, but until this person sent me the message, I didn't. And I'm not saying that to sound facetious, that I have an inbox full of folks. Please don't hear that way. But someone messaged me saying, Luke, one of the reasons I joined HubSpot was looking at your posts around flexibility, etc. And I jumped on a Zoom with them. They're on the other side of the world. They're in our American team. And I was almost fighting back tears to think that little old me, I'm not little, I'm over 6 foot tall, but someone in Australia could make an impact on someone, the other side of the world. I still don't know how we engaged in content, but I think if folks are writing pieces to go viral, they've missed the point of it.
Yep.
Will content you write that people think's amazing go viral? Yes. It's a natural occurrence. And is there metrics and data behind it? I'm sure there is, but I really don't think there is a recipe to go viral. Mm-hmm. The follow-up from that, if someone replies to one of my posts or sends me a message, of course, I'll start a conversation. But I think it can be dangerous to look at, I want to get this outcome from it outside of adding value.
Yeah, I completely agree. It needs to be authentic. And I think if you start with that in mind, that end in mind, it stops being authentic because you have a game plan and that's what you're trying to achieve. Whereas I think if you pull back one step and just write kind of what's going on in your day to day, and we have so much value to add in the conversations we have, in the phone calls we have, in the updates from our businesses, there's so much to add that people are interested in knowing. And as you said, if they're not, they'll just unfollow you.
Yeah, I think just on that, I think the best strategy is to have no strategy, just to be who you are professionally. And I'm sure a few thoughts just in sharing that came to mind. I'm sure you can think of any event you've been to, Sinead, where you're talking to someone and you can just sense it. They're talking, but they're trying to get to a point to pitch you. And no one wants to be trapped in that conversation. So if you provide value, if you provide a glimpse to yourself, you will win in the long run.
Yeah.
And if you don't, people will smell it from a mile away.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're all drawn to each other for connection rather than sales pitches. So I totally agree. And Luke, the premise of this podcast is that some people need, in the conversations we're having, a bit of a zhuzh, a bit of energy into what they're doing day to day. And I've never seen before, the team and I have really noticed how much people are wanting to have a change. So if someone is thinking about a career move or feeling like they're stuck in a rut or feeling like they're not quite having that zest for work, what one bit of advice from someone who loves what they do and work often isn't work, what bit of advice would you share with them?
I'd like to share two, if that's all right. I know one's very heavy. I don't think I could choose one. First thing I'd say is, if you're in a bit of a rut, when was the last time you went for a walk or did something that brings you joy? Like, if you love a sunrise or a sunset, when was the last time you blocked out half an hour? Admin can wait to go watch that sunset. When was the last time you went and had a catch up with a friend? Because a lot of the time, I think there's times where we think we don't like our job, but a lot of the time it's our energy level is drained and we will express that in a form of frustration. I have great days at HubSpot. I also have terrible days when nothing seems to go to plan. I don't put my identity in that. When things aren't going to plan, I make sure I end that day with something that will bring me joy, so that one bad day doesn't trigger into 2, 3, 4. And then before you know it, I'm calling someone like you saying, Sinead, I'm over HubSpot, help me get a job elsewhere. So that's the first thing I'd share. The second thing is that if you are in that bit of a funk or the zhuzh, as you put it, talk to your friends. We've all got a handful of friends that we could ask, what am I good at, Sinead? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time, because we're running our own race a million miles an hour, we don't necessarily see that. So someone might have that light bulb moment. If you don't have folks in your network, reach out to an agency recruiter and just say, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I'm in a bit of a funk. What would you recommend? Before you even do that, maybe talk to your manager. There's another great practical bit of advice. Hey, Sinead, look, I'm feeling a bit burnt out. I'm a bit over this job. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time, it actually might be just that conversation that stops this little snowball becoming an avalanche. Mm-hmm. So I know you asked for one. Sorry, I've given you about 5 or 6.
But they all tie in together, and it's a solid strategy. It's a solid strategy for if someone is feeling like they need to kind of focus on the next thing. And I think a lot of what you had suggested, they all tie in with leaning on people and that connection and going and speaking to people. And whether it is your manager, your friends, your peers, your agency recruiter, whatever it is, I think you're exactly right. Having that, I know for me, I have to externalize things. I can go through scenarios and situations in my head. I won't reach an outcome until I am in a conversation with someone and I'm actually talking through it. And I don't even need to have their answer. I'm having light bulb moments because I'm saying it out loud, and that's when it starts to make sense. And so I think there's a lot to be said for speaking to people and leaning on people in this situation. We have one short life. It is so important for people to love what they do and to feel excited about coming to work. As you said, not every day, but most days.
Yeah, I think if I may as well, the other thing I'll share is that so often our burden could be someone else's blessing. And I will often, when I'm having those terrible days, think of a lady named Oven. Now, that name means nothing to most folks. Oven is my sponsor child. She's in Indonesia. She's 10 years old. And by us paying less than $1 a day, and this isn't a shout out to sponsored children, so please, if you want to go do it, and don't feel pressure that you have to. But I think 2/3 of the world live on less than $2 a day. And so me in my Australia, first world country with a roof over my head and running water, if my biggest issue is that 3 candidates didn't take an offer, or the deal that I banked on closing didn't close, then I got it pretty well off. And I don't want to diminish the talks of inflation and recession, but I think sometimes that perspective of my burden, most of the world would die for that opportunity to have that as your biggest problem. So sometimes taking a step back, removing yourself and your emotion can be really helpful too.
Completely. It's like during the pandemic when we were all struggling, and absolutely hold space for the fact that we were in a situation where our borders were closed and there was, of course, a health crisis, but then naturally across the world in many, many countries, COVID was impacting in a far more severe and serious way. And there was all of the health implications as well to many, many, many people. So yeah, you're right. Perspective is always super important. Thank you so much for joining me today, Luke. I really, really appreciate it. I so value the insight, and I know many people, everyone listening will as well. So thank you so, so much for jumping on with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a ball.
Pleasure.
This podcast is sponsored by Lotus People Recruitment. We are an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency with a genuine human-first and innovative approach. Lotus People are disrupting the recruitment industry by placing quality and service at the heart of all we do. Recruiting roles across HR, talent, business support, and much more. Head to our website today for more information if you are a job seeker or an employer hiring staff. We're at lotuspeople.com.au.